Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Module 1 review session. I'm glad to see that a few of you are here today, and I hope that this really does help you. For those of you that are not able to be here today, remember this is going to be recorded, so I'm assuming you're watching this as a recorded session. And if you're not here, but you do have questions that result from this session or about the course, please feel free to always send me an email or ask me the questions in the Q&A section in our discussion area. In the interest of time, we're not going to be able to cover every single content area in every single chapter that we're having for this particular week. But I do want to touch on some high points that we want to kind of look at when we really look at the chapters. Because I'm a visual and audio learner, I'm hoping that this review will help some of you who are audio and visual learners to kind of grasp the concepts in the chapters more thoroughly. When we start with chapter 1, we start looking at what health is, how it relates to nutrition, and how this can affect you. So we start off with, what are the 6 dimensions of health? For the most part, if someone says, are you healthy? You typically think of yourself as being healthy if you don't have any kind of disease processes or any illnesses going on. But when we look at the 6 dimensions of health, we'll see it's really more holistic than that. The 6 dimensions of health include your physical health, and that's probably the first one that we normally go to. This is looking at appropriate body functioning, looking to see about your immunity. Are you meeting daily energy needs and nutritional requirements? But we also have to look at the other areas such as intellectual health. This doesn't mean that you're smart or you're not smart, but it does mean that you're able to use your intellect or your learning to adapt to the environment. And this also means that you have to have a well-functioning central nervous system. When we talk about emotional health, it's not that you maybe are a sad person or a happy person, but if these emotions are taking over or you have a lack of control of your emotions, we have to look at emotional health. So it's that capacity for you to be able to express your emotions as appropriate and then control emotions as appropriate. Social health, it really is important to have social health. This is interactions and relationships with others. How do you deal with interactions with others? Do you have healthy relationships with others? And this time during these pandemics is making a huge impact on social health when it comes to being quarantined or having to stay away from other people. Spiritual health is not just about religion. Religion can be a component of your spiritual health, but what it comes down to is things like cultural beliefs, your purpose in life, and how you view the world. Okay, religion could be a huge part of your spiritual health, but it's not the only thing we consider. And finally, looking outside of ourselves, we have to look at environmental health, or those external factors that affect us in our living and work settings. Right now, we're seeing a lot of quarantine happening. We're having to walk around with, for example, masks. In those particular situations, that environmental health can be making a difference when it comes to how we have health in general. If you work in an area that's stressful, and you bring that stress kind of gets to you in that environment, it can make a difference when it comes to your overall health. If you work in an area that exposes you to carcinogens, things that cause cancer, that can be an external factor related to your health. So we have to look at all of the areas of health. In here, we're going to look at nutrition and how it relates to health. And again, if you look in the box, we show you those 6 areas that we're going to talk about. When we talk about nutrition, nutrition is important to every aspect of health. Okay, what we eat affects our bodies, and it affects how we're able to maintain and repair cells, think and discern topics, to react to situations, hopefully appropriately, to interact with others effectively, and to grow spiritually, and to adapt to external factors. All of these dimensions are interconnected, and all of them constitute a complete assessment of health. So a health assessment is not just about what you take in, it's actually about all of the 6 dimensions. When it comes to nutrition, that's the cornerstone of all those dimensions. As a nursing student, I'm thinking that if you're looking at these dimensions, you're probably thinking to yourself, I can see how they're related. For example, if you're in a hurry between clinical and class and your family, you may not eat appropriately. Maybe that means you missed a turn when you were driving somewhere because you weren't thinking clearly. Maybe, we hear the term hangry, where you're hungry and angry at the same time. When we don't have effective nutrition, we might lose the ability to interact with others and to react to situations appropriately. So you can see that nutrition really affects all areas of our life and our health. We start off in this textbook about health promotion, and that's really looking at preventing or promoting health. Later on, we're going to talk a little bit more in future chapters about looking at nutrition as it relates to specific disease processes. So what is the goal of health promotion? Well, health promotion is really looking at increasing the health of individuals, families, groups, and communities through lifestyle changes. Okay, we have to have knowledge and techniques and community supports that will allow us the ability to get the information and skills and the means necessary to adopt these behaviors. We say it takes a village, and in this case, it can take a village to promote health promotion in yourself, in your family, in maybe some of your community groups, or just in large communities in general. And we'll talk about those a little bit more as we move on in this chapter. Unless you've been under a rock, you've probably at least heard of Healthy People 2020. Some of us who are a little bit older remember the Healthy People 2010 and possibly even the Healthy People 2000. The Healthy People 2020 has a purpose. Okay? The government comes up with information based on research, and it prioritizes health promotion in our country. It's updated every 10 years. So in 2010, and pretty soon you'll see the research compiled from the current data, and we'll see a Healthy People 2030 come out. But what we're looking for is health promotion and, of course, disease prevention. And these objectives are really set to help promote a society where people are going to live long, but not just long, healthy lives. They want to live long, but also healthy. We want to have the quality along with the quantity. The objectives of the Healthy People 2020 really looks at decisions and policies that affect disease prevention efforts and health improvement priorities. This goal setting is going to set a standard that we're going to look at later and assess how we met those goals. And determining how we met those goals and what we need to change will actually identify what we need to put in our Healthy People 2030 proposal. It looks at critical research, it evaluates critical research, and it looks at what we need for collecting data. For our particular Healthy People 2020, if you think back over the last 10 years, we saw a lot of policies that we're looking at the ability to get accurate health care, or adequate health care, excuse me. We talked about the Affordable Care Act, the ability for people to have access to health resources. We saw a lot with the Miss Obama in the White House about nutritional efforts for kids. So all of these things kind of played into our purpose for Healthy People 2020. Okay, as we look at disease prevention, there are 3 different classifications that we talk about, and it really goes along with the progression of the disease and how far along we are. So if we look at these 3, we want to start off with the 3 classifications being primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay, so we're going to look at like a kind of a continuum. If we look at primary, anything we do when it is called primary prevention includes activities that are really trying to avert or avoid the initial development of a disease. So for example, if we're trying to avoid getting diverticular disease in the intestines, we might eat something like a high fiber diet. We don't have diverticular disease, we're trying to avoid it, so we're eating a high fiber diet. Okay. Maybe we're trying to avoid becoming diabetic. So we might limit our intake of sugars and carbohydrates. Okay. We haven't got a disease, so we're trying to avoid it. Moving on to secondary then, it's saying, okay, we've been diagnosed with some type of a disease or illness, but we're talking about early times during this disease or illness. So we're looking at secondary prevention, looks at saying, okay, we detected it early, and we either want to stop the progression or reduce the negative effects of the disease. So for example, you go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you, we think you're pre-diabetic, your blood sugars are kind of high, we're going to keep a check on it. But in the meantime, we want you to limit your carbohydrate intake, limit your sugar intake. Okay, and we're going to come check you again. You go back to the doctor. your blood sugars are still a little high, but they're lower than they were. So we're going to call you that you're diabetic, but we basically started keeping your blood sugars under control with diet. Because if we let them get out of control, now we're going to start moving forward with the disease process where we start getting negative effects. Okay, same thing goes with physical activity. You may know people who can control their diseases, such as like mild hypertension, diabetes, simply by diet and exercise. Okay, we're trying to prevent further complications, further negative effects. We're trying to say, okay, we have this, but we're trying to make sure it doesn't go any further or get any worse. That's secondary disease prevention. As we move into tertiary, we're saying, okay, we've got the full-blown, for example, hypertension, full-blown diabetes. What we're trying to do now is minimize complications of the disease. So these are things to pretty much help keep the disease possibly like under control. So, for example, if we've already got coronary artery disease, we had the buildup in our blood vessels, we had to have coronary bypass surgery. Okay, so we have our surgery, and at this particular point, we're going to say, okay, look, we have to have a diet low in saturated fats. You have coronary artery disease, we've already done surgery, we have to change our diet now, or we're going to have surgery again because we're going to have blockages again. If you have diabetes, for example, and they're going to say, listen, diabetes uncontrolled can lead to things like glaucoma, can lead to vascular diseases, can lead to nerve damage. We want to make sure that you don't get these, or we're going to minimize how much you get by watching your diet. So that's tertiary. So as you're looking at your patients, also consider what level of prevention are we looking at when it comes to the diet we're suggesting? And is it feasible? Are we trying, if we already have full-blown coronary artery disease, is it really feasible to think that we're going to go back to things like primary prevention and try to prevent it from happening? That's not going to happen. It's already been there. So look at your patients and see where we are when it comes to this continuum. Our patients have to be educated. Okay, you have to be educated. We have to have certain levels of education in order to develop what we call health literacy. Okay, literate we know as meaning being able to read and understand things, but when it talks about health literacy, we have to make sure our patients have the ability to understand what we're saying in order to be able to follow through. If we give them a bunch of information that they don't understand, the ability for them to be compliant is pretty slim. When it comes to educating, there are 3 different ways that we can educate, or 3 different ways we can get educated. Okay, the 3 forms include formal or educational settings. This is what we're doing right now. This is an academic or a formal education setting, whether it's online in a formal setting, whether it's in a classroom in a formal setting. This is what you're doing as you become a nurse. As your patients, depending on what their level of education is, it may be they may have only done middle school or high school, or some may have college, some may have post-secondary, after their doctorate degrees. So all of those are formal settings that allow them to get education. Okay. Non-formal education is still organized. Okay, it's not in an academic setting, meaning we're talking about colleges or schools or institutions of learning. But it may be something like a hospital or a clinic or a community center. Maybe there's some place where you're going to teach, maybe at the local church, you're going to go teach about a diabetic diet. That would be considered a non-formal, organized teaching event. Okay. The third one is a little more casual in that we can't really control what information we're getting or necessarily what our patients are getting. So we're talking about informal or casual activities. And those are things that kind of occur in daily life. It could be watching television. It could be reading a newspaper or a magazine. Now we've got a lot of things digital, social media. We've got things like videos like YouTube and TikTok. We've got different advertisements that pop up, for example, on Facebook. We have to be careful with this type of learning because we have to make sure that whatever we're getting is research-based. So your patients may come to you and say, I saw something on the television. This is what they said about eating soybeans. I want to change my diet. At this particular point, they may not be incorrect, but we want to make sure that they're using that information to further their knowledge to justify it. And we'll talk about sources a little bit later, but but we want to make sure that we understand where we got the form of education, and keeping in mind that formal and usually non-formal organized are going to be a little bit more reputable because of the environment that they're in. All right, so when we move into nutrients, they are the foundation of everything in nutrition, and there are 6 categories. From your readings, do you remember what they were? So, the 6 classes of nutrients: water, carbohydrates, proteins, fats and fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. We have to have every single one of these for our body to function and to achieve optimal health. All right, so what do? Well, they provide energy. So for example, our carbohydrates, our protein, and our fat actually provide us energy, and we break that down in chapter 9. Or if they don't directly provide us with energy, they're going to act as a catalyst. So they're going to work with other nutrients to provide energy, and that would be your vitamins and your minerals. Some of these nutrients regulate body processes, things like proteins, lipids, vitamins, minerals, and water. I asked some of you guys this week in your discussions why water was so important. What does it do? It aids in the growth, the nutrients aid in the growth and repair of tissues. So if we're trying to grow or we've had some kind of trauma, we want to watch our intake of proteins and lipids and vitamins, minerals, and water. So you can see that these nutrients are crucial, and each one has different recommended levels. Each one has different things that it does in the body. So we're going to talk a little bit later about having a balanced diet where you have a variety of foods. We have to make sure that we're getting all 6 classes of our nutrients in our diet to maintain a healthy status or to get healthy and restore health. You may have heard of essential and non-essential nutrients. A lot of times you'll see this on a commercial where they'll say it contains 6 of the essential nutrients needed in the diet. Okay, so what's the difference between essential and non-essential? Does it mean that we need some and we don't need some? Actually, no, we need them all. Okay, we need the nutrients. But when we look at essential versus non-essential, think of it this way. An essential nutrient is something that the body can't make or can't make enough of to meet its requirements. So those are essential. And think of it this way. It is essential that we get these nutrients in our diet because we cannot do it ourselves. Okay. Non-essential, again, we still need, but the body has the ability to make these from other nutrients that we take in. So we need all of them. All of them are important. All of them are considered essential for functioning. But essential nutrients are the ones that we have to have in the diet. It is essential we get them in our diet. Non-essential, the body, we're going to get some in our diet, but the body can also make them from other nutrients that are ingested. Every course, every nursing course you have, every topic, we've got to have some lingo. And some of these you're going to become more familiar with, and some of these you just need to kind of review so that you say you have heard them. Your dietary reference intake, your DRIs. You'll see this a lot in the next couple of chapters as far as being referred back to. And what the DRIs are, just like their name says, dietary reference intakes. It's references that we recommend for your dietary intake. And these references are determined by a committee of experts. And they're based on sound research, and they can change as new research is conducted and published. But this is looking at what we need to take in and what the reference ranges are. An estimated average requirement, or an EAR, this is the amount of a nutrient that you need to take in to meet the basic requirements. And this is based on one half of the individuals in a population. So how does that work? Well, when we look at an entire population and we do our studies, we look at how much of a specific nutrient is needed to meet a basic requirement. Well, we know that every single person is different. So as we take a statistical analysis of the population, we come up with a number that says, okay, if we come up with this number, that will meet the needs for at least half of the individuals in the population. You know, we talk about 50% being the majority. Again, we can't do it for everybody because there's going to be outliers in either direction. So as long as you meet this, about half the population is going to be okay. In other cases, we're going to have to, if you are in for an individual assessment, we'll look at different requirements for you. But this is a good reference point to start off with as you start learning nutrition. I hope everybody has seen the RDA, or the recommended dietary allowance. Okay, this is the amount of nutrients sufficient to meet the needs of almost all of a population. Okay, so going back to the EAR, we're talking about the RDA. The RDA is what you're going to see on the back of a label. Okay, when we say almost all of the population, we have to keep in mind that there's not a specific number. We're not talking 75 or 80% of the population. We're talking about over half, which is almost all. But this is the number when we look at the statistical analysis. This is the number that represents the amount of a specific nutrient. So, for example, you may see something that says, we recommend that you get 500 milligrams of vitamin K or 500 milligrams of vitamin D, and I'm just throwing numbers out there. That number is based on statistical data that was done on the population, and this will kind of is accurate for almost all of the population. So again, this is what's used on nutritional labels. Understanding adequate intake. Okay, this is not a specific number in that it changes with everybody, but for every person, your adequate intake is that you're getting enough of a nutrient to maintain good health. Okay, so for my adequate intake might be a little bit different than somebody else's adequate intake. But it's about the level of a nutrient that you need to maintain good health. Now, on the same note, we want to get enough, but we don't want to get too much. So that's why you'll see reference ranges. So this is the low end, this is the high end, but when we get too far up, you can get too much of a good thing. An upper intake level is basically the highest you should really get before we're going to start getting adverse reactions. A great example of this is that potassium. Potassium is needed for cardiac health, for your heart health, and it should be kept in a certain range. Too low, and we have problems. But on the same note, don't take too much, because if we get too high, we're going to have adverse reactions. So, for example, too much potassium can actually make your heart go into an abnormal rhythm. So we have to be careful getting too much of these nutrients. And then finally, we have something called acceptable macronutrients. We have macro and micronutrients. Distribution ranges. Okay, that's a mouthful. Basically, what this is telling us, this is a daily percentage of energy intake values. It's looking at macronutrients. So we're looking and saying, okay, look, you should be taking in these nutrients, these macronutrients, in enough of an amount to get adequate energy, and at the same time reducing chronic diseases. Okay. So again, we don't want to get too little. We need to get an acceptable amount. But then again, we don't want to get too much. So again, it sounds kind of tedious, but we want to make sure we're staying in those ranges. And once you understand those ranges, it's really not hard to do. So how do you define if we have imbalanced nutritional intake? And it's common for our society to say, for example, somebody walks by and they're overweight or obese. We're like, oh my goodness, they've got overnutrition. Or somebody who's extremely thin, oh, they're undernutrition. And that's not exactly the truth. We have to look at actual measurements or what's actually taken into the body to determine if we have overnutrition or undernutrition. Okay, undernutrition is saying you're not getting enough energy or nutrients when we compare it to the DRI values. That doesn't mean you can't be obese. You can be taking in, for example, too many carbohydrates, but not enough of the other nutrients. Maybe you're not getting enough protein. Okay. On the same note, you may not be taking in enough and you may be thin. So visual appearance does not determine undernutrition or overnutrition. On the same note, overnutrition says you're taking in too many nutrients and too much energy compared with the DRI values. Okay. Malnutrition is your overarching theme. Malnutrition, if you know Spanish, MAL means bad. So we're thinking bad nutrition. Malnutrition is your overarching theme. That's basically a condition that says you've either got imbalanced nutrient or energy intake. Okay, doesn't mean it could be too much, it could be too low, but it's imbalanced. So it can be under or over nutrition. Okay. All right, we end the chapter with self-efficacy. And throughout this course, we're going to talk about changing dietary habits, changing lifestyles, helping others change lifestyles, understanding psychology with relation to nutrition is also a key component. We talk about self-efficacy. You may have heard of self-efficacy in other studies, but what does self-efficacy mean? It means that it's our perception or how we see ourselves and our ability to have power over our lives and our behaviors. Don't confuse this with self-esteem. Self-esteem is when you walk by a mirror and say, I look good today. I don't look good today. Self-efficacy is saying, I need to make a change and I can do it or I can't do it. It can be positive or it can be negative. If you are talking about nutrition and we say, okay, you've got positive self-efficacy. You believe that your personal behaviors can be changed. I can do this. And I have control over my life. I make the decisions when it comes to what I'm eating, the foods that I choose. If you have negative self-efficacy, you feel like you're powerless. I have little control over my circumstances. I know I need to change my eating habits, but I'm just never going to be able to do it. I have no willpower. I have no control. Okay. So high self-efficacy, we're climbing the mountain. Low self-efficacy, we don't even know where to start. We can't control ourselves. We can't control what we're doing. Okay. All right. That was a very brief overview of chapter 1. I hope it helped you clarify some things. Let's move into chapter 2. Okay. Chapter 2, we start off with choosing foods and thinking about choices when it comes to foods. We have a few things that affect our food choices. Okay. It comes down to food preferences, food choices in a different context we'll talk about, and foods that we like. All of those affect the way we select our foods. Okay? The first thing is genetic. And I didn't really know much about this until a few years ago when I realized I have a genetic trait that affects food. And I'll talk about that. But some people, honest to goodness, are just born with a desire for sweet and salty foods or for sour foods or for spicy foods. You can be born with a genetic trait that predispositions you to kind of crave or to enjoy these types of foods more. It doesn't give you it doesn't give an excuse to constantly eat those sweet and salty foods, but you can recognize that they're there, and recognizing that they're there if this is part of your genetic traits will help you when you have to learn how to control yourself. Also, environmental factors. This is learned preferences. If you were raised in a family that was prone to eating spicy foods, they become part of your food preference. Whatever you were exposed to from your culture or from your socioeconomic factors, if you grew up on the coast, you may be more predisposed to like seafood, possibly. Second is food choices. If I go to the refrigerator right now and see what's in there, my decision on what I'm going to eat is going to be based on what's in that refrigerator, okay, or what's available to me, or what's within driving distance of me to go get fast food. Okay. So my choices, again, are going to be based on what's available or what's convenient when we're actually ready to eat. A lot of times cost and convenience can be prime influences. If I want to go out to eat and I don't have any money, then my choices are going to be limited to my refrigerator. Okay. If I feel like going to make something fresh, but the grocery store is 25 miles away, it may not be convenient for me to run there, then I may have to stop at the McDonald's, which is a mile down the road. And then finally, honestly, it just comes down to what you like and what you don't like. Okay. We choose based on what we enjoy eating and don't think about anything else and any other factor besides taste. Okay, this is probably what we are on, for example, Thanksgiving, or we go to a buffet. We see all of the foods there. We choose sometimes based on what we like to eat. If we're conscious on a diet, we may be choosing foods based on their nutritional value. But if we're talking about liking food, it's just a matter of choosing what we like to eat. As we eat, we should consider all of the factors that influence us in the way we choose things. And remember, we have the power to consider each factor differently. So, for example, I know I love chocolate cake, but I better consider that a little bit differently because I know that maybe that's too much for me, or maybe that's not appropriate. I need to choose something different. Now, back to genetics. This is something I learned. I couldn't figure out why everybody likes cilantro. And to me, cilantro just literally tastes like dish soap. And people couldn't understand that. Like, oh my God, it's not. So I looked it up, and it's a genetic trait. Some people actually, on their taste buds, cilantro tastes literally like Dawn dish liquid. And the best thing I can tell you to kind of relate that is if you remember a while back on Facebook, we had that dress that popped up, that infamous dress that nobody could tell what color it was. And some people said it was one color and some people said it was the other color, and it sparked a lot of debate. Based on your genetic predisposition or your genetic makeup, it basically affected how you saw that dress. Same thing happens with foods. Sometimes foods taste different for different people in that, for example, some people find cabbage really bitter. Some people don't find cabbage really bitter. I think cilantro tastes like dish soap. My husband could eat it all day long. It tastes really good. So keep in mind as well, when people tell you that something tastes funny, it may really taste funny to them based on their genetics. So there's dietary guidelines for Americans, and there's some guidelines we really should look at and consider following if we want to follow a healthy diet. I'm not going to lie, they're a little bit of a buzzkill, but they're realistic when it comes to having a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle. The first thing is you got to follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. If we can start our children young in a healthy eating pattern, it does really do continue through life. They learn at an early age to follow this healthy eating pattern. Not that they're going to choose to do it all the time, but if we start the eating pattern, start it young, and continue that all the way until we pass, keep it all the way through, our body still needs healthy eating from the time we're born until the time that we die. When you do eat healthy, focus on a variety of foods. Pick the ones that are more nutrient dense and consider the amount that you're eating. Okay? If you eat the same thing every day, the odds are you're probably not going to get all of the essential nutrients you need in the amounts that you need. On the same note, look at the nutritional density. This is kind of the which is better for you. An easy comparison is something they have in your textbook. We see a glass of soda next to a glass of juice. Maybe orange juice. Maybe they both have the same amounts of sugars in them, okay? Because we do know the juices have sugars. But if we look at the density, we're looking at the fact that this orange juice on the right has no added sugars, okay? So it's natural sugars. It has vitamin C. It has potassium, okay? It has other things. So looking at the two side by side, the orange juice is more nutrient dense, full of nutrients than that Coke on the left. So choose wisely. And of course, focus on the amount that you're eating. Remember, I told you everything in moderation. Even something healthy you can get too much of. And I'll throw myself under the bus here. When I started Weight Watchers for the umpteenth time, they gave us a list of free foods. Well, fruit was on there. I like bananas. So I was eating 3 or 4 bananas a day thinking I was doing good because they're free. Unfortunately, bananas still have calories. Even though they're healthy, I was getting too many and too much. And I wasn't losing the weight like I needed to. So watch the amounts of food that you eat. I talked about sugars when I talked about the Coke. So you want to limit the calories you get from added sugars and saturated fats. Later on, I'm going to show you a label. It actually shows you there were added sugars. Remember that all foods that have, for example, carbohydrate, they actually break down into, they have natural sugars, but try to avoid the foods that add additional sugar into it to help it taste better. And then, of course, saturated fats we want to avoid. Reduce sodium intake. Oh my goodness. Don't use salt, right? We have to remember that sodium is not just table salt. We have to look at other ways that sodium sneaks into our diet, things that we don't consider. If you look at the back of a soda can, there's a lot of sodium in there. If we look at the, I had a brain dump. If we look at deli meats, a lot of sodium in there. Canned foods, a lot of sodium in there. So make sure you're looking at all the other sources, not just salt. Otherwise, it can sneak into your diet. I've seen hypertensive patients come in and say, look, I don't understand why my blood pressure is not going down. I'm not putting salt on anything. Well, let's look at what else you are eating. Okay, if you're eating canned foods, which in a society where fresh foods can cost a lot, that's a good possibility. Look for the ones that say reduce sodium. Okay. Who knew that drinking Diet Coke all day long was going to raise my sodium levels? Well, if you look at the back, there's sodium in those. So just be really aware of where else it's at. It can hide on you. Try to shift to healthier food and beverage choices. My husband this week has Grumpy, grumpy, grumpy. He's trying to lose weight, but he doesn't want to give up his tea. Okay, but I've had to tell him to shift from that sweet tea to that unsweet tea. Okay, when possible, make the choice, the more healthier choice. Doesn't mean you have to give up everything you like completely. Just see, is there a way that I can eat this in a more healthy format? Okay, if you love fried chicken and you're just absolutely not going to give up fried chicken, maybe you want to shift to an oven-baked fried chicken, and maybe you want to shift from dark meat to white meat. Okay? That if you can pick stuff that you're still going to enjoy, you're more likely to stay with the program. The other thing comes down to support. Not just your own, but we have to support eating patterns for everybody. You know, if you're going to a cookout, bring something healthy. If you're going to be making supper, try to make something healthy. You know, try to support healthy eating patterns for other people as well. You may have heard of something called MyPlate. MyPlate is a great way to help people really put into perspective how to have a healthy meal. MyPlate was designed by the government. It's designed to guide consumers in their food choices. And it really looks at implementing the goals of the dietary guidelines we just talked about and the DRIs. It reminds the Americans, well, and it can remind anybody, but it's predominantly used in the US. MyPlate reminds us to eat a diet that meets nutritional needs from foods, but also limiting the components that we eat in excess. Okay? So for example, if you look at the plate in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that it's divided. Okay, one half of the plate is going to be fruits and vegetables. So you can see that the red and the green. Now think about last time you made a plate of food. Was it really half of it fruits and vegetables? Okay, and remember, sometimes a squash casserole with all of the cheeses and the breadcrumbs, a little stretching on your fruits and vegetables. Okay, a little bit stretching on the vegetable side there. It does have a web-based interactive tool that people can go to give them really personalized guides to the food groups, to the serving sizes. They can pick foods that fit their individual needs. It'll help them make menu plans. It helps you include all of the food groups, such as the grains, the vegetables, the fruits, the dairies, and the proteins. Okay. It does recommend that there are 4 themes. In other words, we want you to have a variety of foods. We talked about variety. Proportions. This is not a 16-inch or 18-inch or 24-inch serving size plate. This is a regular size normal dinner plate. Okay, if you buy a set of dinner plates and it's got bowls, dessert plates, a smaller dinner plate, and then a bigger dinner plate, this is actually the smaller of the 2 dinner plates. The bigger one is too big. Okay, which I know can be a little stressful when you start putting stuff on there. But we're talking about eating foods in moderation, but then in addition to this, add the activity into your day. You've heard a diet doesn't work without exercise. Well, an exercise doesn't work without a good diet. They have to go hand in hand. Another eating plan that is out there is called the Healthy Eating Plate Plan. Again, it appears very similar to the MyPlate, but it does give you a little bit more information when it comes to foods to choose on a daily basis, and it also includes healthy oils and water instead of a dairy-based drink. Okay, it's bringing the fats in a little bit different, and removing the dairy-based drink, adding the water to the drink, and adding healthy oils to your cooking. Within this plan, there's something called a Power Plate, which is a vegan dietary pattern, and that is based on plant-based intake with no animal-derived foods or nutrients. Okay? And the Power Plate's important if you have somebody who is vegan, because we still want to make sure they're getting the fats and the proteins that they need through a plant-based diet. The other neat thing about the Healthy Eating Plate Plan is that it does include different pyramids. The Healthy Eating Plate Plan is a pyramid. It doesn't look like a plate. It's a pyramid that goes up similar to the food pyramid, but it also includes pyramids from other diets. So when you have patients from other cultures, it's a little hard sometimes to have them eat foods that we're accustomed to when they have other food preferences. Okay. We can't generalize everything to a culture, but we can have the options out there to say, listen, if this is more appropriate to the foods that you like, here's a pyramid that kind of lists foods that may or may not be relevant to your particular culture, but offer these to them as opportunities to look at different foods that they may prefer over other ones. All right. These food guides that we have, okay, these pyramids are going to differ in the number of animal foods and legumes that are in them. It's going to be different in the variety of fruits and vegetables and seeds and nuts recommended based on cultural preferences. For example, there may be a fruit or vegetable in your culture that may not be as popular in a different one. But it does promote higher consumption of fruits and vegetables. And in this pyramid format, they can see those instead of actual proportions on the plate. But you can see at the bottom, you get more. As you get to the top, you eat less. All right. If you are diabetic, or if you have a friend who's diabetic or a family member who's diabetic, you may have heard of something called exchange groups. And it's a way of looking at a diet and using the exchange method to look at portion sizes to meet your nutritional needs. Okay. Again, the groups that we use, there's 3 different groups that we're going to use. We determine sizes by dividing the foods into these groups. We divide into carbohydrates, meat and meat substitutes, and fats. And with that, each of those 3 groups contains different serving sizes of foods within that group. And each of those different serving sizes provide a similar amount of carbs, protein, fat, and kilocalories. So where you're not exactly looking specifically at carbs, protein, fat, and kilocalories, you're looking at saying, okay, this amount of this type of food is going to provide this many carbs, protein, fat, and kilocalories. Whereas if you opt to eat, for example, this type of food, this is the amount you can eat. So for example, if we're looking at, we want steak for dinner tonight, and we look at a ribeye compared to, say, a filet mignon. We're looking for fat contents and protein. We are more likely to be able to eat a larger portion of that filet because of the amount of fat that's not in it versus the amount of fat that's in that ribeye. On the same note, it may be 2 different types of foods. You've seen things on diets where it says you can eat this one little piece of candy for this amount of nutrients, or you can eat this whole bowl of cantaloupe. We've got serving sizes that are interchangeable. So they'll use these exchange groups to look at the amount of carbs they can have in a day, the amount of protein they can have in a day. It's really used a lot for the carbs because of it was introduced by the American Diabetes Association, but it's like an exchange group. It's like I have this many carbs, and I can have this much of this fish, this much of this potato, and this much of this in exchange for my carbs. So it's a really cool exchange list, and you can look them up online and see the exchange list for all the different foods out there. And if you're diabetic, sometimes this is the way they go versus counting calories. So we give you all of these different ways to do diets, and there's recommendations here and there's recommendations there. And oh my gosh, how do I determine what I'm going to do and what I should follow? First thing you want to do is when you're looking at a diet plan or a dietary recommendation is consider the source. Who's giving the advice? Is it a government agency, a private nonprofit? Is it a professional association? In other words, did they have a dog in the fight? A government agency, a private nonprofit, and a professional association really don't make any kind of money from you changing your dietary guidelines. They're there for the benefit of the country, for the benefit of Americans, and for community health. On the same note, if this is coming from a food manufacturer, it may not be wrong, but they have a dog in the fight. By you changing your diet, you're eating more of their food, which is basically a promotional advertisement for them making more money. So when you do see those other ones, don't turn them away, but just make sure that you go back and look at the research behind it. I can give you a good example. There's a wine commercial that comes on TV for a specific wine, and they'll tell you that a glass of red wine in the evening is great for cardiovascular health. They have a dog in the fight. They want you to buy their wine. But if you really do look it up, you'll find that the Mediterranean diet does include a glass of a certain kind of red wine, not a certain brand, but a certain kind, And in moderation, 1 glass of wine in the evening really does help with cardiovascular health. So kind of keep an eye on where you're looking at, who's giving you the information. Yeah. Look at the comprehensiveness. Okay, is this diet plan you're giving me really for high blood pressure and I don't have high blood pressure? So maybe it's not appropriate for me. Is this an overall healthy eating plan, or is this really focusing on one specific health problem? On the same note, what about negative effects? I can remember when everybody went on the low carb diet, the Atkins/South Beach diet, and they cut out all the carbs. The problem was, on the same token, it's good to kind of limit your carbs, but people were eating higher fat foods. And those higher fat foods led to the fatty liver disease. Excuse me. And that was causing problems. So if I follow this particular diet, do I have the potential to have negative effects? What is the basis of the recommendation? Kind of goes into play with the first one with the source. You're telling me this, but based on what? So you'll see that a lot of your courses too. You tell me this information, but tell me what you got to back it up. Okay, so look at what what's based on. Is a diet based on the fact that they studied 10 people over the course of a week and they felt better at the end of the week? Or is this like a research study that was done over multiple times over the course of time with a large population, and here's what we studied and saw the results? This is kind of like the show me the studies, show me the data. And then honestly, look at how easy it is to do it. If you pick a diet that's well established, great references, comprehensive, but it is just like almost impossible to follow it, do you think you're going to follow it? So make sure you're looking and say, look, is this reasonable? Is this feasible? If you're picking a diet full of fresh fruits and vegetables and fresh meats for somebody who has a low socioeconomic status and can't afford it, it's not going to work. You have to look at a diet that they can use. Maybe that includes frozen vegetables, but make sure it's feasible to them. Is it easily adopted? If I told you tomorrow that you have to cut out all of your hamburger and instead chop up cockroaches and make burgers out of them, that'll get your attention. Are you going to do it? Probably not. Okay, so make sure it's easily adoptable and feasible. Here's something you might not have known. Just some fun facts. We spend, as Americans, more money on food away from the home, drive-thrus, restaurants, that type of stuff, convenience stores, than we do on purchases of food for the home. Take a look at your grocery bill. I know it's like a shock when you get that $200 grocery bill. But then look at how much you spent on food outside of that grocery store in small intervals. Okay? We usually spend more food on food outside of the home than, for example, food that we're bringing back to the home. And that usually also means higher calorie meals. We know that our food consumption is affected by trends. What we eat can be affected by the cost, availability, our knowledge of food, and sometimes just the time to either get the food or prepare the food. Okay. We know by data and statistics that's been collected that lower income households do report that they have fewer fruits and vegetables. And it's probably because fresh produce is relatively expensive. If you're not a grocery store person, meaning that you've got someone else in the home that goes grocery shopping, go to the grocery store and walk through the produce department and look at how much things cost when they're fresh, especially if they're not in season and they're being imported from somewhere else. Okay, we've got to find ways to get our lower income households the ability to get fruits and vegetables, maybe not from the fresh route. Or we can change them over and say, look, let's look at what's in season. Let's look at what's available in the area. That maybe some different fruits and vegetables that are a little bit less cost. Okay. And of course, that when we see this, we find the data that Americans, we're just consuming too many calories. We're not getting enough vitamins, minerals, and fiber, but we're getting the calories. I mentioned earlier about a food label. Okay. You have to understand how to read a food label when it comes to eating correctly. And you have to also be able to help your patients look at food labels. The food labels are the best way for you and a consumer to see how this food fits your nutritional needs. Okay. They are used to identify the content of the products in that package, but also you can put two packages side by side and compare products to see which one is actually better for you. I remember going to the grocery store, again, back to that good old Weight Watchers, and it said that black beans were free. So I'm going to go get some canned black beans to put into my chili. I pick up the store brand and I pick up a name brand, and I'm looking at the backs of them side by side. Because somehow or another, when I scanned it, one can showed up that there were points in it, and one can showed up with no points in it. Well, that didn't make any sense, right? They're both black beans. When I started looking at the food label, I saw that the store brand had added sugars. It had added fats into it to make it taste better. So not all foods are the same. Look at the labels to see what's in there. If you have a patient or yourself with a specific health problem, make sure you look at the labels. For example, hypertension and sodium intake. If you look at this particular label, we go down to the sodium, we see it's got 160 milligrams, which for a 2,000 calorie diet is 7%. Keep in mind, a low sodium diet for a patient may say you can have no more than 500 milligrams a day. That means it's not 7%. Okay, so you would have to take your 500 milligrams and minus that 160. So make sure that you're looking, but you notice this doesn't say salt. And so it's a good way to make sure you tell your patients, look at the sodium content. Okay, don't look for salt. This also tells us about total fats, saturated fats, and trans fats to help you be more aware of what's in there as far as fat intake. We want to decrease our intake of saturated and trans fats. And it's broken down. You'll see a total fat in there on this label, and then we see saturated and trans fat. Okay. This one's not too bad. It's got 1 gram of saturated fat and no grams of trans fat. Remember we talked about the RDAs and the percent daily value? If we look at the bottom on that last column, that percent daily value is telling us how much of the daily value is in this particular product. Okay, so you will see that we're getting 20% of added sugars. Okay, if we're talking about our vitamins, we're getting 10% of our vitamin D for the day. One other thing that's very important to understand with a food label is that we have to understand that these numbers are based on a serving, not the whole container. Big mistake with people. If I look at this container, there are 8 servings in the container. So 1/8 of this container means this is what it has in 1/8 of the container. It's 1 gram of saturated fat in 1/8 of the container. If I ate the whole container, we're talking 8 grams of fat. Okay. We're talking 37 times 8 when it comes to carbs. We're talking 230 calories times 8. And they can be really deceiving. I did this the other day. I'm trying to watch what I eat. I go buy some pretzels because they're good. They're a low-fat food. And I look at the back, oh, low calories. And that just didn't even dawn on me to look at it. I'm eating half of the bag. It's a small bag. I look at the back of the bag, and there's 12 servings in this little teeny bag. So just for kicks and giggles, I measure out what 1 serving is. It was less than the palm of my hand. It equaled out like 6 mini pretzels. So it sounded good in essence, but if I looked at the whole thing, it was really not that good for me. So remind yourself and your patients, look at the serving sizes. Okay, if it looks good, but then you eat too much of it, it's not good anymore. We need to be able to understand food descriptors. They're not meant to be deceiving, but they can be deceiving. We have descriptors like free, low, extra lean, reduced, less, etc., etc. And what that does is kind of tell us what's in there, but it's always relative to the food. Okay, we find them on a lot of food products. A lot of times we see them on cheeses, ice creams, meats, cookies, crackers, salad dressings, and cereals. And here's a good example. Okay, we see that this is Breyer's ice cream. I mean, who doesn't like ice cream, right? But it says in big letters, no sugar added, right? 110 calories. Hey, that's not bad. What are the couple things we're going to look at? We're going to flip it over and look at the back. First of all, 110 calories per serving, 1/4 of a cup. Have you ever eaten a 1/4 of a cup of ice cream before? Very difficult. Okay. And unless you're getting a measuring cup out to measure it, you're probably going to eat more than a 1/4 of a cup. So you've got to consider, it's okay to have this, but you've got to consider that into your dietary values. The no sugar added. When we went back to that label earlier, it said added sugars. This means that it's additional sugar added to it to make it taste better. It's not telling you that it's sugar-free. The foods that are in there that made up this ice cream, the cream and the vanilla and some of the flavorings, they're going to break down into sugars. So there's still sugar in here. Is this better for you than other ice creams? Maybe when it comes to sugar, but they've also may have added more fats in there to make it taste better. We know that fats and sugars are what makes things taste good. So make sure you do flip it over and look really carefully at what's put in there. All right, let's look at extra lean. For example, extra lean ground beef. Excuse me. If you break it down, it's got 97% lean meat, 3% fat. Obviously, it's absolutely better for you, but don't think that because it says extra lean that it's completely fat-free. I noticed the other day that my husband was buying, or was insistent that I buy, fat-free creamer because it made him feel better. It was fat-free. And I'll get it. Fat-free does sound pretty good. But when you flipped it over, they had added more sugar into it to make it taste better when they took the fat out. So be very careful about when they put these descriptors on packages. Don't let it draw you in until you look at the back and really read, okay, you took this out, or this is what you're saying, but what's the catch? And sometimes there is no catch, but sometimes there is. There's been a trend recently for people going into organic foods. Okay, let's just really quickly talk about what they mean by organic. Organic foods, if they're truly organic, can give you the USDA organic seal. That means they have at least 95% or more of organic ingredients. If it's a one ingredient food, for example, like a head of broccoli, it can be considered 100% organic if it has met the USDA standards. And that means that they actually have to go and have on-site inspections of where these things are grown, processed, raised to make sure that they are actually organic. And they're going to look at everything from pesticides to fertilizers to conditions that animals are raised in. If it's more than one ingredient, it has to be 95% or more of organic ingredients, and it can still use the seal. Okay, they don't have to, but it's optional. Okay. If it's made with organic ingredients, you see that in quotes, they can still put organic on the front, but on the back of the box, they're going to put somewhere about made with organic ingredients. They are not supposed to use the seal. But what this means is that in the ingredients in that food, say, for example, we're going to get like a cake mix, hypothetically, so at least 70% of that cake mix has to be comprised of organic ingredients. Okay. If it's less than 70% are organic, then they have to list each organic ingredient on the label. Now, can they put on the front of the label, made with organic ingredients? Absolutely. All that means is at least one thing in there is organic. So if you're really into organic foods, make sure you read more specifically what they are. If you see the organic label, now, of course, unless they're breaking USDA rules, if you see the label, they're at least 95%. But even if it says something on the front like made with organic ingredients or something like that, make sure you flip it over to see what's actually organic and what's not. Sometimes you're going to see health claims about foods. There are guidelines for these. In order for a health claim to be put on a food label, it has to be approved by the FDA, which means there has to be some type of research to back it up. Some examples would include, for example, includes whole grains, which reduce the risk of heart disease and certain cancers. Or soy protein reduces the risk of heart disease. Or they may put on something like a diet rich in fruits and vegetables can reduce the risk of some cancers. Okay. What you're not seeing on this is you have to be careful what they're saying. And there's other ones found in your text, but here's what you want to be careful of. You see this label, it says a low-fat diet. In a low-fat diet, whole grain foods like this may reduce the risk of heart disease. That keyword in there is may. This is not a health claim because they're saying it might, of course it might not, but it might. So if they're claiming that they are, you see in the examples it says, whole grains reduces the risk of heart disease. Soy protein reduces the risk of heart disease. Fruits and vegetables reduce the risk of cancers. They do. They are backed up with research and they have to be approved by the FDA. Now, how much it reduces the risk, that doesn't have to be said. It could be a very tiny little bit, but it did show that it reduced the risk. But the one on the left is where they get the loophole that says it may. It may not. Okay, but that's how they kind of reel you in. We ended chapter 1 with self-efficacy and your ability to control your view on your ability to control things. So let's end this one on locus of control. Okay, we're thinking about now diet, but locus control is your perception of your ability to control events and life experiences. Okay, so understanding that an internal locus of control, it means that you feel you can influence the forces in which you come in contact with. Okay. And external means you don't have any power. You perceive that you don't have the power to control what happens to you. Okay. Talking about like some kind of a fate type of thing, I guess. If we're talking about nutritional standpoint, we're talking about if you have an internal focus, you're the kind of person that goes to the grocery store, you have a grocery list, you know what you're going to eat, you stick with your grocery list with the occasional little, oh, this looks good, and you throw it in there, but you're pretty much in control, and you can say, I can go in there and I can control myself and only the foods that I need. If you have an external locus of control, you probably don't control it at all. You are like, look, I can go to the grocery store with a list. I'm either going to forget half of it or I'm going to get drawn in by advertisements and I'm just not going to control what I eat. Or you can say, if you have a locus of control, you know that you can go to a buffet and you can avoid that chocolate cake at the end. If you have an external locus of control, you're like, I know I'm going to go to that buffet and there's nothing I can do. I'm going to eat that chocolate cake. Neither one is bad or good. It's just that you recognize which one you are. If you have an internal locus of control, head to that buffet, head to the grocery store. You know you can control it. If you don't, maybe you need to do something like I do. Get online, order your groceries, only get what you need, and they get delivered to you. You can't squirrel, as I call it in the grocery store. You can't run over and just grab things. Okay? Maybe going to a buffet is not for you if you don't have a locus if you don't have an internal locus of control. Maybe you need to go to a restaurant where you can only order a specific meal and that's what gets brought to you. All right, it's been an hour and research shows that if you don't take a break after at least 50 minutes to an hour, you don't retain any information. So at this particular point, if you're watching this in a recorded version, please hit the pause button, take a break, go potty, let your dog out, do something to snack. Take about a 15-minute break and come back. For those of you that are here live, hang in there with me. We're going to keep on moving forward, but you can always watch this later with a pause. But I strongly suggest that you pause to make sure you regroup and then come on back. Okay, for those that are still here, that are in the live, or if you're just not coming back and you've unpaused this, let's move on to chapter 3, talking about the digestion process. I'm not going to go through this in detail only because this was basically the main component of our discussion this week, knowing the different organs and what they do. It is going to be key for you to understand what the organs do when it comes to the digestion process. Make sure you understand everything from the mouth to the anus and what its function is in the digestion process. And you may want to pause on this slide for a little while and just kind of read through. This is a great diagram, but also go back and, of course, read the discussions, read the questions and the discussions that I'm asking related to this. But you must know the digestion process. After digestion, you'll have to learn absorption. And there's going to be some things in these next couple slides and even in chapter 9 that are going to be a little scary and confusing, but you really just need to understand the foundations of those and understand kind of why it's functioning the way it's functioning. When we talk about absorption, we remember from our discussion this week that nutrients are absorbed primarily in the small intestines. A small amount of absorption happens in the large intestines when it comes to nutrients. Now remember that we are talking about other, there's everything's absorbed in there, but you will need to kind of learn where things are absorbed. But there's 4 mechanisms that are responsible for the absorption of nutrients. There's 4 ways that this happens. Okay, if you think back to chemistry and biology, possibly your anatomy and pathophysiology courses, These terms may sound familiar. You've heard them somewhere before, but you don't remember them. You may want to go look them up to kind of get an idea of what's happening. But passive diffusion and osmosis. This is when we're able to absorb molecules from an area of high pressure to an area of lower pressure. So maybe we're high pressure from the intestines to lower pressure in the capillaries. If you've ever dumped highly concentrated salt water into a cup, you see the salt disperse, and we've got passive diffusion and osmosis. It's dispersing from high pressure areas to low pressure. Facilitated diffusion, a little bit different than passive, okay? Facilitated diffusion, also called active diffusion. This happens in the same kind of concept as passive diffusion, but in order for these molecules to go through the cell membrane, they've got to have a little bit of extra support. They've got to have some proteins to kind of carry them across. They don't go on their own. If we talk about energy-dependent active transport, okay, this is when we've got fluid pressures that have to act against the uptake, meaning that we've got to have a pumping mechanism to kind of support the energy and the molecules to go over to where they need to go. We're kind of going against the grain, you might say. So we've got to have some kind of a special protein carrier to take them there. Think about fish that are swimming upstream. They've got to have some, there's something we've got to go against the grain to get that transport. We have to have energy to support the active transport, okay? We've got to have energy to support going against the grain to get these nutrients. Engulfing pinocytosis. If you remember, biology, cytosis is where our cells eat each other, okay? Or a cell will engulf, say, bacteria, okay? Engulfing means that something has, kind of like, think about the Pac-Man video, okay? When that Pac-Man engulfs the balls and engulfs the ghost during certain times. When a substance touches the villi, and that was part of your discussion, is about the villi and the microvilli, and I've posted, there's pictures everywhere. When a substance touches that villi, okay, the villi kind of come out and kind of encircle the substance, they engulf it, and that allows it to pass through the circulatory system. All right, then moving into elimination, because we've gotten digestion, we've got absorption, now we're going to move into elimination. Got to get it out of us. We remove accumulated waste from the body. What we don't need, we get rid of. Okay. Elimination will include things like undigested substances, such as fibers and fats, and those have combined with minerals, water, bacteria, and mucus to support the ability to move through the intestines to be eliminated. Okay. When the accumulation gets into the rectum, it causes the rectum to kind of distend or get bigger. That triggers a reflex, kind of like when you have to pee, your bladder gets extended, you feel like you have to urinate. When the rectum extends, it creates a reflex, and that helps you, and that triggers you to say, hey, look, it's time to go to the bathroom. Then you expel your feces from the body. Okay. There are conditions where people don't have control over this reflex. They don't even know when they have to go to the bathroom, and you'll talk about that in some of your med-surg courses or your patho courses. But on a normal condition, the accumulation of this feces makes the rectum get a little swollen. So, oops, gotta go to the bathroom. You head to the bathroom, and you get a happy poo. Okay? We also have to have enzymes when it comes to digestion. We have to have some help on the way down to have things to help break up things. We have to have gastrin. Gastrin will help us release gastric juices. And that's triggered when the stomach gets distended. The body's like, have to have gastric juices. Gastric juices come in, help break down the food. Secretin, this goes into the pancreas. Basically, secretin causes the pancreas to send bicarb to the small intestine. It helps reduce the acidic content of the chyme. Okay, and when we reduce the acidic content of the chyme, we're able to absorb easier by putting it in a more basic level. Histokinin, or CCK, this kind of triggers that pancreas, and it says, okay, pancreas, we need to put some exocrine secretions out, okay? And what that does is it acts against the gastrin. Remember, the gastrin does the gastric juices. This says, okay, stop, okay? It goes to the gastrin, says, stop putting out hydrochloric acid, stop secreting those gastric juices, and it activates the gallbladder. When the gallbladder contracts, it causes bile to be released into the duodenum. The liver releases bile. The bile is stored in the gallbladder. When the gallbladder contracts, it releases the bile. Now, bile is used, if you remember, to break down fats. When we talk about gallbladder disease in a future discussion, you're going to see that certain diets are going to trigger symptoms in the gallbladder disease. And you're going to think back to, okay, well, it goes back to the fact that the gallbladder is triggered to constrict. And when it constricts, it comes down on, for example, gallstones. But that's all related to breaking down fats. We have two processes called catabolism and anabolism, and it really deals with breaking down or building up materials. Okay, understanding catabolism is when the body breaks down food components into smaller particles. And as the smaller particles are broken down, they're used as energy, either as heat from the process of breaking it down or as a chemical energy. Okay, because the process of breaking down foods or the process of metabolism causes any kind of chemical reaction causes the heat. That heat can be used as energy, or it could be simply that we've broken it down to become a molecule used for energy. On the flip side, where catabolism breaks it down, anabolism builds it back up. Okay, so we're talking about during anabolism that the body is taking a construction type of approach. We're either constructing or synthesizing our nutrients into new substances. So we may be mixing things together to make something new. We talked about essential versus non-essential nutrients. Remember, in non-essential nutrients, we didn't have to have them in the diet because our body was able to build them. That's done when we talk about anabolism. It uses other substances to create new substances. This can also help create things like cell structures, or it can also even create enzymes. All right? Both processes can take place inside of a cell at the same time. We can build up and we can break down at the same time. Okay? This is a good illustration of what catabolism is and what anabolism is. And if you need some time to review it, I suggest that you pause the video for just a few moments. And occasionally in all these processes, things go wrong. Now, we could have an entire semester about when things go wrong, but let's just talk about a couple, because this is what we really saw in our discussion this week. When things go wrong in the digestion, absorption, and elimination, we can see things like heartburn, we can see intestinal gas, and constipation. These are probably the three that we most often see without disease processes, but they're also mostly because of lifestyle behaviors. It's going to be the time of the day that you eat, for example. The kinds of food that you eat may cause gas. Maybe lack of drinking enough fluids, maybe what's causing constipation. So mostly it's related to lifestyle behaviors. We do have to recognize that sometimes, though, we have them for other reasons. For example, a drug side effect. If we're taking pain medicines, it may cause decreased GI motility. Based on our discussions this week, we know that GI motility, if it's slowed down, can cause constipation. We might have certain disease states. For example, if you have what we call a hiatal hernia, maybe the sphincter at the bottom of your esophagus isn't closing correctly. Maybe that gives you more frequent heartburn. Chemotherapy can make you feel really sick. It can give you heartburn. It can give you constipation. It can give you nausea. So there's a lot of things that can cause it. But the most of the time, without the evidence of a disease process, it's literally a lifestyle change. So changing your lifestyle can make a huge difference. When I was looking for a picture for this slide, I thought, well, we know heartburn, gas, indigestion, nausea, vomiting. But that sounds like a Pepto-Bismol moment. I found this Pepto-Bismol ad, which triggered me to kind of look up some things. You know, this is a pretty old ad. Some people who've been in their grandmother's bathroom have probably seen the Family Circle magazine. So I did some research on Pepto-Bismol just because it was something kind of interesting at the moment. I'm not always a nerd, but sometimes I look up things. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that Pepto-Bismol was invented in 1901, just a few years before I was born, as a treatment for infant cholera? And if you haven't had pediatric yet, cholera was when the infants got, when they were drinking the water supply, and there was cholera in the water. It didn't affect the adults as much because of our immune system and our ability to kind of fight off that. But in infants, it caused horrible diarrhea, which caused horrible dehydration and caused a lot of infant deaths. But Pepto-Bismol was originally invented in 1901 for infant cholera. And now it seems like We use it for everything. All right, let's go into chapter 9, our final chapter. In chapter 9, you'll see that we're breaking it up between two different modules. For module 1, we're going to cover energy and fitness in chapter 9, and we're going to start off with energy sources. Okay, if we talk about glucose, okay, glucose is the product of carbohydrate digestion. Remember in an earlier chapter we talked about there are 3 things that give us energy: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So when a carbohydrate is broken down, it's broken down into glucose. That's also why if you're diabetic, you have to watch your carbohydrate intake because of glucose. Okay. When we break down fatty acids and glycerol, when we break down lipids, we end up with fatty acids and glycerol. So we use fatty acids and glycerol as a source of energy when we break down lipids. When we break down our proteins break down into amino acids, and that's our source of energy. So each one of those nutrients provides energy, but in different forms after the breakdown process. Okay, what is ATP? All right. In a very simple note, ATP is basically the cell's source of energy. There's a lot of chemical reactions, there's a lot of chemical components and makeups, and you can see that in this picture, but in the underlying overall scheme of things, it is the cell's source of energy. It is used by almost all of the biological reactions that happen in your body. Hydrolysis. Again, look at medical terminology. Hydro means water, lysis means rupture of a cell. So if we're talking about hydrolysis in the body when it comes to nutrition, hydrolysis is the first step that we have when we use fat as energy. This means that triglycerides then are broken down into glycerol and fatty acids using water. Okay, remember we talked about water serving a lot of purposes? All right, this is just an example of hydrolysis of ester, which is a type of triglyceride. There's so many more, but what I want you to really focus on is that on the far left, we see that we've got the triglyceride. Okay, we add water to it. See that plus H2O? What happens then is it breaks it down. We've got 2 different things that are broken down over there. So water is breaking down the triglyceride. It's going to break it down into glycerol. It's going to break it into fatty acids, and we're going to use those for energy. Our body likes energy, but just like us, it has preferences. It likes some more than others. So, for example, if you have 3 children, you might like them all differently. When it comes to your body, as far as energy, it likes glycogen first. Where does glycogen come from? Okay. All right. It likes fat from adipose cells second. It'll take it, but it's not its first choice. And then third, protein. Okay. When it comes to energy, these are the 3 ways it wants to get it. We have different energy pathways. Okay. Remember, all of these have to be broken down. Carbohydrates, lipids, and protein, they have to be broken down. And the way they're broken down is considered an energy pathway. Okay? The glucose pathway, okay, that results when we get energy because glycolysis produces pyruvic acid and ATP. And part of that process depends on niacin and other B-complex vitamins. Remember earlier I said that some of those nutrients didn't actually give us energy, but they were catalysts for us to get energy. When we're trying to get glucose in the glucose pathway, we have to have the niacin, which is a B vitamin, and other B-complex vitamins to break it down effectively. Why do you think that? Here's an aha moment for you. Why do you think that when you take a B vitamin, the bottle says energy support? B vitamins are part of the catalyst to help us on the glucose pathway. So they are considered energy support. The next time you're looking at multivitamins or you're looking at vitamins, look on the front. You'll say, aha, that's why this B complex says energy support. Okay, there's 2 ways we can do this as far as the breakdown. Anaerobic means we don't require oxygen. Aerobic says that we do require oxygen. It's just 2 different processes to still get the same way. When we talk about the lipid pathway, Triglycerides are broken down into glycerol and fatty acids. Okay. The glycerol is turned into pyruvic acid and is used for energy. Okay, that's the lipid pathway. What happens is fatty acids are produced into acetyl-CoA. They enter the TA cycle. They end up being pyruvic acid. This is just getting you know that there's a way. It's not that they're not just broken down immediately. They have a pathway they have to go through. So we have to have the nutrients to support the processes. Finally, we have our proteins. They're broken down into amino acids. Okay, those amino acids, the nitrogen amino acid groups, are basically processed by the liver and the kidneys. Okay, other amino acids, not the nitrogen ones, enter the pathways at different points. What's key here is to understand we're talking about the liver and the kidneys. We have to make sure that we have functioning liver and kidneys. In Unit 7, we're going to talk about supplements and how they affect the liver and kidneys. So if we're trying to make sure our body's getting energy, we have to have functioning liver and kidneys if we're trying to get energy from proteins. We can't break them down all the way without the liver and kidneys. Let's kind of take a look at carbs, my favorite. If we're looking at carbs when it comes to energy, we have to understand that carbs can act differently when it comes to how they provide energy. If you'll remember that carbohydrates, primarily from muscle glycogen, meaning that we're getting glycogen from the breakdown of the sugars that are stored in the muscles, they fuel short-term high-intensity activities. Okay? Hang in there with me. We use both carbohydrates and fat stores when we're doing low to moderate intensity activities. So what does this kind of help us or tell us? If you're an athlete, you may have heard of carb loading. Okay, we don't want to grab too much glycogen from our muscle stores. If you're an athlete and you're going to be doing high intensity activities, we call short term can still mean 60 to 90 minutes, but what we're trying to avoid here is pulling our energy from our muscle glycogen. So what we'll do is we'll carb load. So you'll see athletes that are engaged in continuous exercise that's going to last longer than 90 minutes will carb load. And that gives the body a huge amount of carbs up front to use as energy during that high intensity activity versus we don't want to pull it out of our stores. On the other side of the coin, let's just say you're on a diet plan and you're going to start walking moderately, 3 to 4 miles per hour. Okay. Then when we're doing lower or moderate intensity activities, we're not going really wide open. Our body will actually use carbohydrates and fat stores to fuel that. Okay. So don't carb load if you're just going to go walking around the block. Okay. Carb loading is only for people who are going to be high intensity for more than 90 minutes. And that, again, that's just to give us a boost of energy and to prevent us from taking energy from the muscles. If you're doing low to moderate intensity activities, you know, the goal is to stay hydrated, but not necessarily load up on carbs. Okay. As far as energy requirements in our body, we have what they call basal metabolism. And it's important to understand your basal metabolism. This is the amount of energy that you need to sustain activities. This is what you wake up in the morning, and these are the energy requirements you need through the day. So, for example, some people may be on like a 1,500 kilocalorie diet. That's where you need to stay exactly where you are. Okay. We also need energy from physical activity. Okay. Anytime we move any kind of part of the body, the skeletal muscles, it results in energy expenditure. That's why you see on your Fitbit or your Apple Watch, it says it's time to get up and move. It's time to get up and move. Okay. We have to consider our basal metabolism. If we're going to add physical activity, we consider that into our energy needs for the day. Okay. And then thermic effect of food. Thermic meaning heat. Remember that we have to have energy in our bodies to break down our foods. So we actually have to have energy to have that metabolism to digest, to absorb, and to store foods. So these together make up energy requirements on a regular basis. In certain cases, we have to do what we call adaptive thermogenesis. Your body has conditions that makes it where it has to adjust calories needed because of something going on. So, for example, if you're in extreme cold, if you have an extreme change in kilocalories over several days, if you've ever watched, like, for example, Naked and Afraid on TV, they go days without eating. Your body has to adapt the amount of nutrients it uses to sustain processes. Things like physical and emotional trauma. This adaptive thermogenesis is not included in a daily calculation because it's calculated individually based on your needs. It'll always add energy requirements, but would take individuals' interviews to measure this. So, for example, you may see somebody who's maybe in a burn unit and they've been burned and they've got a lot of healing to do. You may see them on diets that are 6, 7, 8, 10,000 calories a day because the nutritionist has calculated that these people need this much energy, this much fuel to heal, because the healing process has been added to that basal metabolism and thermic effect of food, in addition to physical activities. So it's taken all that basic stuff and added to it. As far as components of fitness, which is part of this chapter, we have 3 components that deal with fitness: flexibility, muscular strength and endurance, and cardiovascular endurance. Okay, flexible is being able to move the muscles through their range of motion without injury. If you've had your health assessment course, hopefully you know what range of motion is. We're not talking about being able to do the splits or do a complete back bend, although you might be more flexible than normal, but we're talking about general flexibility as far as being able to be average would be being flexible enough to go through full range of motion without injury. Muscular strength and endurance, okay? Strength is a little different than endurance. Strength is, how much can you lift? Endurance is how long can you do it, okay? So we have to have strength and endurance, hard work or prolonged work. Cardiovascular endurance, just like it says, it's dealing with your heart. And the heart is the major organ that's going to pump blood around the body. So when we talk about cardiovascular endurance, it's the ability of the body to take in, deliver, and use oxygen for physical work. All right. You've always been heard, drink, 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 drink. Water, water, water. Okay? When you're going to exercise, it's important to drink even more. Okay? Before you exercise, hydrate. Okay? We want to make sure that you get excess fluid in there so that when you do exercise and you have fluid loss, that you have enough fluid for fluid absorption as you need it. And we want to make sure that your urine output is normal. If you get dehydrated, urine output's not going to be normal. Again, adequate fluid intake is important, again, to prevent dehydration and to replenish the water lost through sweating. Athletes should weigh themselves nude. Not a pretty sight in some cases, but nude, before and after exercising. Why is it so important to do it nude? Well, after we exercise, if we are losing water, it's soaking up into our clothes. But technically, then it's still on us. So we're not going to get an accurate representation of water lost. When we do weigh, for every pound that you see lost on the scales, it's 2 cups of water. If you'll just remember the mnemonic of pints a pound, the world around. That means 2 cups of fluid equals 1 pound. I also want to mention here that this is also where some of your diet plans will get you. You see on TV, we guarantee you're going to lose 5 pounds in the first week. What happens is the supplements that they're giving you have what they call a diuretic effect. It makes you lose more water. And if you lose water, of course, the scales are going to show that you've lost the weight. The problem is now you're at a water imbalance, and when you actually drink water, your body's going to absorb it like a wet sponge, and you're going to gain it right back. So don't be fooled by the weight loss when it comes to water loss. Okay. Remember that we can also get water through food. So making sure we have normal meals and beverages after exercise will help restore our hydration. And don't forget that we get water through, a lot of water through certain foods. So think about what kind of foods have a lot of water in them. Things like watermelon, for example. Things like cucumbers. Okay, there's a lot of foods that have a lot of water in them that we can actually count towards our water intake. And finally, we talk about ergogenic aids. If we're talking about fitness, we want to make sure that we look at some of the things that people feel help them when it comes to being an athlete. So the term ergogenic aid is basically looking at drugs and dietary regimens that some people will believe will increase their strength, their power, and their endurance. And some of them have a little bit of science behind them. Okay, for example, there's a whole list in your textbook with what they are and what they claim, and of course what the actual effects can be. But a good example is caffeine. If you're a nursing student, obviously you know what caffeine is there for. But when it comes to fitness and athletes, caffeine is claimed to improve performance. And there is some evidence to that effect. Although, if you're in the Olympics, the Olympic Committee considers a form of doping. Okay, so there's the question. If I drink a Diet Coke, am I considered doping because I have caffeine? Absolutely not. But what they're looking at is levels in your system. If you've ever seen, for example, little the pills in the convenience stores, or the pills, these are little caffeine tablets to boost energy. And too much of those is considered doping. And of course, side effects of caffeine, significant things like heart racing, jittery. Here's some other ones that you may have heard of, just to kind of show them up there. And you can go in your book and look at what they are and what their claims are and what they really do. But some of the ones you might have recognized, of course, of caffeine. The Q10, CoQ10, you may have seen that in the drugstore. Energy bars, ginseng, salt tablets, electrolyte tablets, even sports beverages like Gatorade. Now, sports beverages are great when you lose electrolytes and fluid when you're an athlete, but you don't want to drink these, especially in excess, just to try to increase strength or increase power, increase endurance. All right, I think all of us are about full. I think we're all sponges about full of knowledge. So if you have any questions, if you're watching this recorded, if you have any questions, I hope you jotted them down while we're going through here. Please feel free to shoot those questions to me either in the discussion board or an email, and I will be glad to get back with you. I hope you enjoyed this review. I know it was kind of long. I think I purposely made it a little longer because I wanted to cover as much as I possibly could without wearing you completely out. With that, guys, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to another great week with you. Keep up the good work with the discussions, and I will see you next week with next week's content review.